Robert Eggers, hello.
Hey.
First of all, just tell us a little bit about the origin of this project and how you came to it. I know for a lot of us who are fans of your work and horror, it feels like there were rumours of this for quite a long time. Tell us how this project sort of came about for you.
I saw a picture of Max Schreck standing in the Gothic arch of Hutter's chamber door in a book on vampires, like in an elementary school library. And I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen and wanted to find this movie. And so my mom helped me track down a VHS. This is before Amazon and YouTube, so we had to wait for a month for it to arrive. Saw the movie, thought it was incredible. The atmosphere and the fact that Murnau and his collaborators turned Stoker's story into a very simple fairy tale, I think it is kind of part of its staying power. And then when I was 17, a friend of mine and I, we directed a high school play of Nosferatu, and the artistic director of a local theater company saw that production and invited us to do a more professional version of it at his theater, and it changed my life, and cemented the fact that I wanted to be a director. And it made Nosferatu like a part of my identity that would always be there, even if I hadn't made this film. And then very foolishly, about 10 years ago, I started pursuing making a grown-up adaptation of Nosferatu. It fell apart many times, and I'm glad because I've grown a lot as a filmmaker and as an adult, and have closer relationships and can collaborate even more fluidly with my heads of department. We are further extensions of each other, and I think, and also this timing is aligned everything so we would have this quite incredible cast, so.
What made you want to adapt or readapt Nosferatu as opposed to just another Dracula?
I think that there's a lot of issues with Stoker's novel and with my sort of idiotic obsession with authenticity. I would have been trying to keep it close to the novel, and because there's a lot of things I didn't like about the novel, it didn't seem to make sense. And Nosferatu, as I mentioned earlier, because it is a simpler fairy tale, there is a lot more room for me to explore the things that I was interested in than if I was doing Dracula. But as passionate and obsessed as I was with Nosferatu, there also had to be a reason to do it again. And what was really the inspiration in finding a reason was, Murnau calls Ellen a somnambulist, and sleepwalkers in the 19th century were thought to be in tune with another realm. And this really excited me because I felt, if Lily Rose Depp's character, if the female protagonist is the central protagonist throughout the whole film, I think this is going to give us the opportunity to have a lot more emotional and psychological depth. And also because Ellen emerges as the heroine in the Murnau film, I'm still can weave a story that can be respectful to the original and follow the movements of the Murnau Galeen screenplay, while still doing my own thing with it.
Tell me about your version of Count Orlok with Bill Skarsgård as well, because I think what's interesting is, when with the silent movie, obviously there is no dialogue, and there's something that makes that even more kind of otherworldly. Whereas naturally you've got Count Orlok sort of talking, and does that kind of naturally kind of make him more human, I suppose, than the original Count Orlok?
Well, I think as much as I love Nosferatu, what is Max Schreck, as incredible as that makeup design is, what the hell is it? It's some kind of thing, but basically, let's put Max Schreck's beautiful performance aside for a moment. In the evolution of the cinematic vampire, the vampire becomes, first more sad and tragic, and then an anti-hero, and finally a hero, and finally Edward Cullen, who's no longer even scary, and this, while it's a tale of obsession and a love triangle and a gothic romance, it's a horror movie as well, and the vampire needs to be scary. So, so obviously I have an interest in folklore, but in order to understand how vampires were scary, I needed to read about people who actually believed in them and thought that they were real, and what did they think vampires were. And of course, they are humans who are dead. So the early folkloric vampires are more like in cinema movie trope terms, like closer visually to a zombie because it's just a walking corpse. They often have many of the supernatural powers that we associate with cinematic vampires, but it's a different beast, so to speak. So anyway, this, of course, begs the question, what would a dead Transylvanian nobleman look like?
Yeah.
And what would he, so that told me what he was wearing, and told me what his hairstyles would be, and also informed how he would speak. I also, in trying to get away from twee vampires, wanted this like super like masculine, phallic Orlok who was like a demonic asshole, and so. Some of the inspiration for his voice and it was like some Soviet films with like really scary Balkan villains, and these guys had these like incredible voices, and so that was something that Bill and I were trying to chase in this interpretation.
Because again, like when you cast somebody as handsome and charismatic as Bill Skarsgård, did you want that I guess that kind of sex appeal, that draw of Count Orlok still to be there?
Yeah, I mean, in a weird way, I do still feel some eroticism between Shrek and Greta Schroeder. Like, even though he is this, rat-like, unsexy creature, there is some kind of pull there. And I wanted to further emphasize that, and yes, like I think, as much as I want the audience to be completely absorbed in the story and not thinking about like the actors or the performance, having somewhere in some part of your consciousness the idea that there is a handsome young guy in there, I'm sure is helpful, and I know it was also helpful for Lily Rose Depp, who truly was like legitimately scared of him in the makeup. It was scary makeup.
Tell me about the updating of the female characters of this, particularly Ellen, and kind of the updated version of the story you're telling in that regard.
Well, as this somnambulist character who's in touch with another realm, she is an outsider and she doesn't fit into 19th century society, and she experiences and feels things like very deeply and in a very real way, but she doesn't have language for it. And no one can understand her. Even like her good friend who's also a woman, Anna, doesn't know what the hell she's talking about, and her husband, who loves her dearly, can't understand this side of her. And the one person who she finds in big quotes, who she finds a connection with, who sees this dark side of her, is a demon lover. He's this vampire. He's this horrible, abusive entity, and that is the tragedy, because there is this pull that he has to her and she has to him, and only they can satisfy each other in this certain aspect that they and power that they have, and so it becomes this complicated story of obsession and a love triangle between Nicholas Holt's character and Bill and Lily Rose. That's some of it.
Well, are you a fan of vampire movies in general? I mean, you mentioned already, the kind of the evolution of that subgenre and the way it kind of ended up with kind of these sort of teen-focused twee vampires in the 2000s. Like, do you have any particular kind of favourite sort of era of vampire movies, I suppose?
I love vampire movies, and we visually quote the Todd Browning movie a couple times,
yeah.
and I love the Hammer Draculas, even like 1972. I like it. Like, there's some cool stuff in there. Freddie Jones is awesome, and like some of Cushing's Van Helsing like exposition was helpful actually in that one, weirdly. But yeah, I mean, I even look at Dracula Dead and Loving It was really helpful because it points out like the things that never work or often don't work or are big stumbling blocks in the story. That was helpful. And I like the fluidity and the flexibility of the vampire. Like, do I have a love for the folkloric vampire because of my specific interests? Yeah, like that's the most engaging for me, but like, can I enjoy Blade? Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Is there a metaphor at the center of this particular vampire in the way that there would have been for, Nosferatu in Germany in the 1920s or whatever else? Like, is there something that you're thinking is particularly 2024 about this version?
I think that's for, social critics such as yourself to engage with, and not for me. I like as a storyteller, like my approach is to just try to articulate the material, physical world of the period as exact as possible, as authentic as possible, and also the interior world of the characters, and try to present that without judgment. As much as Ellen is a female protagonist with a lot of agency, she doesn't put on her husband's trousers and get on the horse and ride into the sunset. She's constricted by all the rules of society, and like the male characters are literally like tightening her corset and tying her to the bed, and I think it's interesting to see like that struggle, but there is no intended message about that or about Orlok, but that's also another lovely thing about archetypal stories and fairy tales and myths and folklore, is that they always kind of work, and they can always be interpreted and reinterpreted. I saw Oedipus, known as Oedipus over here, the other night on the West End. It was great. And it's opening, a new production's opening in January on the other side of the river, because these stories work.
You have, as you mentioned, that kind of obsession with authenticity, and one of the things I love so much about The Witch is that it feels like a movie not just set in that time and place, but it was almost like it was made in that time and place. But how did you approach Nosferatu, especially as something, when you take German Expressionism, that's sort of the opposite, isn't it, to authenticity? So in what way did you kind of feed off both?
It's a misnomer that Nosferatu's an expressionist movie, in my opinion. Like, it is like part of the expressionist movement. The acting style's expressionist. The Galeen screenplay is written in very expressionist prose. But like Murnau and Albin Grau, particularly, were interested in creating a story of German Romanticism from like the middle of the 19th century. I think also there's this idea that they were making a Dracula ripoff, and they were changing things because they didn't want to get caught. But they were changing things based on their artistic sensibilities. They also didn't get the rights, but that was not why they changed things. It was for the dramatic intent. And Kubrick credits Franco Zeffirelli as the first director to be like taking a painting and just copying it wholesale to do like sort of authentic costume designs. But Murnau's doing this in Nosferatu. They're deliberately recreating and referencing Caspar David Friedrich, Johann Christian Dahl, and other Biedermeier painters. So that kind of like historical rigor was something that he was interested in for that film anyway.
Tell me a little bit. I'm always kind of interested in kind of how horror directors kind of approach creating a scare, I suppose. Like, we all are kind of, it's very subjective, I suppose, what we find scary and what kind of fills us with that kind of dread. The Witch was such a scary, powerful film. This is a scary, powerful film in a different kind of way. I guess, how do you approach the kind of the horror and the dread and the atmosphere in this particular movie? Well,
because Nosferatu sort of invented horror movies, obviously you know that there's horror movies before Nosferatu, but because it sort of invented horror movies, you're in conversation with horror history like more than ever approaching a piece like this, and so I felt that if the jump scares that followed that were dictated by the story were not only permissible but I needed to do them, and
because there's snobbery about jump scares sometimes.
And I'm like guilty, as anyone for sort of deriding jump scares. But I think the film is trying to build dread in general. Of course, we have this kind of prologue that ends with a scare, which is and there are one of the great things that does in a horror movie is that if it's successful, then you're on edge the whole rest of the time because you don't know what's going to happen. And like dramaturgically speaking, like jump scares aside, every scene needs to end with a problem. Every scene needs to end on a sour note so that the tension keeps on building and nothing is resolved. And so you're kind of feeling this feeling of dread, which is also, the sound design and the music are clearly major contributors to this. But then, yes, also there are these jump scares, and 3 of them are incredibly traditional, and they're coming, and they're set up in a way that you're just expecting when is it going to happen?
Yeah.
And those were I must say having done them, I've always respected James Wan's craft, but I respect it even more now after really digging in on it myself.
Do you ever do you embrace being a horror director, I suppose, and Nosferatu and The Witch being horror films? Because sometimes there is a kind of pushback, particularly with movies of yours, people like Ari Aster, these kind of, I don't know what we want to call them, maybe art house end of the horror spectrum, I suppose. Do you ever kind of push back on that label of horror?
Honestly, to sound even more like an art house dork, I don't care about labels, but I don't. And I love horror movies, and so that's fine. Here's what I would say is that in contemporary cinema, because of this really unhealthy climate that we're in, we are in kind of a horror renaissance because studios are afraid of things not working in the box office, and this is a genre where you can generally keep the budget pretty low and it will work. So if you're making a horror movie or a sequel, you might get your movie greenlit. And so what has happened is that genre films are a place for filmmakers who are working in commercial cinema who want to explore more interesting personal themes and are able to do that. So that's incredible, and I'm once again guilty, and happy to be a part of it. But where it's a shame is that if you're not interested in genre, then it's a lot harder to get your film financed, which is too bad.
What is your favorite horror movie? Do you have a favorite?
Obviously it's Nosferatu, but the Jack Clayton's The Innocents was the most influential to this film, aside from Nosferatu and The Shining. I've watched more than any other film aside from Nosferatu.
What was it about the Innocents particularly that kind of that inspired this one?
It's the the atmosphere is quite incredible, and also I'm a humongous fan of Freddie Francis, both as a cinematographer and as a director in sort of Hammer and Amicus stuff. Even if the films are not great, his staging is really elegant, and that is the kind of stuff. His best work is with Jack Clayton, both in The Innocents and in a non-horror space, because they seem to really push each other. But the I do these long unbroken takes that are are the kinds of things I enjoy as an audience member, because you feel more. I often feel more engaged in the film and being pulled through the story, without the cuts. And Freddie Francis was really, a master at that. I think with Hammer horror films, sometimes it was because we don't have enough time to do anything but more than one setup. So if this is a one shot that leads to a two shot, leads to the wide, and then finally to a close up, then we can just get it all done in one shot. But in his best work, it becomes just the most elegant way to tell a story.